today to have Maddie Andrews here as our guest on the Power Transformation podcast. She certainly has a truly incredible story to tell, and she is one who knows firsthand how you never let quote unquote challenges define you, and you can still make a lasting difference in this world. Welcome, Maddie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
I'm super excited as well to have you. And I always like to, on the show, always open up with just something fun and lighthearted for all of my guests to answer so that we can know more about you as a person, nothing dealing with what we will be talking about today. And so, Maddie, this is the question for you. If you could name one of your favorite movies, what would it be and why?
Um, my favorite movies would probably be One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It
Oh.
was some of my first experience learning about the mental health system. I found it to be interesting and educational and sad, but a good movie.
hmm And it's one that I think people would consider nowadays a classic, but that,
Yeah,
but
it's a great
yeah,
movie.
all-star cast and everything. I've seen it once and I saw it, it's probably pre-pandemic. I think it came on television, but I had always heard of it and it was a really great movie. And so that is definitely a good pick. It has a really great plot to it, and as I said, some stellar actors in it, and so that made it for such an all-time cast. And so, Maddie, you touch on something that's very important. And you brought up that of mental health, and we will talk about that more because you have quite a journey. And to just have you here and speaking and sharing, this is quite honorable in terms of what you do. But if a person, Maddie, were to ask you this question, how would you respond? Who is Maddie Andrews?
Well, that's a toughie because I'm a lot of things. I am a peer support specialist. I was a teacher. I'm an MSW student. I'm a caring, empathetic, kind person.
Mm.
I'm a nonprofit founder. I think I would say that kind is the biggest characteristic that I portray.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you focused on that because sometimes when we ask a person who they are, they will default only to what they do. But
Right.
for you to focus on who you are in terms of being kind, caring, and compassionate, let me ask you this. Is that something that you think has always been in you ever since you were a little girl? Have you just always kind of naturally been a caring and kind person?
I've always been an empathetic person.
Mm.
There's been periods of my life where maybe I wasn't so kind.
Oh.
There definitely was, but that was a deep-seated issue in myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think naturally I am a kind person,
Mm-hmm.
but we have to learn along the way that we can't take our own problems out on other people. And during my 20s, that was a lesson I had to learn.
Wow, wow. And so be before we get into more of the in-depth parts of it, so you touched on it a little bit, but just share with us exactly what do you do in terms of making a living, helping
Yeah.
others, etc.
So I work at a facility-based crisis unit. People come there when they're in mental health crisis or to detox off substances. And what I do there is called peer support. And what peer support is it's people with lived experience with either mental health, substance use, or both, a co-occurring disorder. And they have a license, they take
Mm,
classes, they get credits, and it's a therapeutic role. We offer hope and inspiration because we have the ability to talk to our clients, say, I've been there too. This is what happened to me, but here's how I overcame it. Here's a skill, and you can do it too. So it's a very inspirational role. I also founded a nonprofit and I work with that, doing peer support part time. And then I'm in school as well. So, but
mm,
peer support is my passion while I work on my master's. it's a unique and up and coming part of mental health care.
Mhm. And tell us more about what that is exactly in terms of peer support. What exactly is that?
So it can become in many different roles. You can do it in the community one on one,
Mhm.
where you may navigate systems. So, say you have somebody who's unhoused, your job as a peer is to find those housing resources and connect your
Oh.
person with housing resources. You can also review coping skills with that person that they've learned in therapy or share coping skills you've learned. In my job with the facility based crisis unit, I run support groups and I also run support groups with my nonprofit. And that's all about building communities, healing
Mhm.
communities. I would say that the most important part of peer support is letting people know they're not alone. Because
Yeah.
when you're in the midst of mental health or substance use or both, you don't always see that light at the end of the tunnel, and you have these professionals who are saying, well, just do this, it's that easy, but really it's not just that easy all the time. So when you have someone who can say, I did try this is how I did it and it worked, and you can do it too, I have found that people are more receptive to that. And I actually had a peer support along the way, and I was definitely more receptive to what he had to say. I had spent
Mhm.
years listening to these professionals. Not that professionals aren't great, we need them, they're wonderful, they have the skills. But when I heard somebody else say, this is what I did, and you see me now, you see I've
Mhm.
overcome, it was life changing for me.
Yeah, I like how you put that, because even prior to me asking what it was, I could just envision peer support helps people know they're not alone in this battle. They're not the only ones who have gone through or experienced it. And it doesn't make them feel ostracized or outcasted because they know they have a place to belong. And we'll talk more about your nonprofit specifically later. But Maddie, you're very open in your platforms about mental health awareness. When a person hears, I can say in our society and also in parts throughout the world, mental illness or mental health, sometimes people automatically put their guard up or they don't want to
Yes.
talk about it or it makes them uncomfortable. But the reality is that so many people, more often than not, either have a loved one that has some type of mental health crisis that happens. It could be themselves, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed. But if you were to summarize exactly what mental health is in terms of specifically mental illness or people that have mental conditions. Will you tell us briefly what exactly does that mean and explain the reason as to why it shouldn't be something necessarily that a person needs to fear, but simply have a greater understanding about it?
Definitely, mental health is highly stigmatized in our
Mhm.
society, and millions of Americans live with mental illness. And the number one mental illness that is diagnosed is anxiety. We all have anxiety from time to time. That's a natural human emotion. But when it starts interfering with your life to a certain degree, it is diagnosed as mental illness.
Mhm.
And it can really impact people's lives in a negative way. They may have a hard time overcoming. It may be really frequently occurring.
Mhm.
Um, but there's a wide scope of mental illness. So there's like depression and anxiety, those are the more common. And then you
Mhm.
can get into serious mental illness, which are things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and schizoaffective disorder. And those are extremely stigmatized. I mean, when I meet people and I say the word schizophrenia, 9 times out of 10, their first thought is that person is violent. Let me stay away. But it's
Mm.
nothing to be fearful of. You know, people with mental illness are more likely to harm themselves than they are to harm you. That's just the reality. And mental illness is the way we were born or a trigger to trauma, extreme
Mm.
trauma. So I have mental health diagnoses. I do have serious mental illness, and I wouldn't hurt a fly. And I just want to be loved and accepted by the world. And I
Mhm.
am very transparent about it. Um, and I do that to normalize the conversation. We all have mental health. It's just to what degree does it impact your life? And for
Yeah.
millions of Americans, it does impact their life in a negative, frequent way. And they do
Hmm.
get diagnosed, but mental health is something we can overcome, mental illness. So I encourage you not to be fearful, but to educate yourself about what's happening in your community because mental health doesn't discriminate. It can impact anybody at any point in their lives.
It really can. And while you bring up more so stats or, you know, direct info about Americans, it's a human issue. As
It
human
is.
beings, we have it. And of course, we speak as Americans, but, I have listeners who are global, but this is a universal
Yes.
issue is that
And it,
we all experience it. And depending on where you're from, if we don't even talk about it a lot here so openly in our own families, in our own homes, I can only imagine in certain parts of the world where it might
yes.
not even be addressed as often.
Mental illness affects everybody across the globe.
Hmm.
It does. And you're right. Not every culture talks about mental illness the same as other cultures. I'm sure there's places in the world where it's more openly discussed than where I
Hmm.
live. And I'm sure there's places in the world where it's not discussed. And I mean,
Hmm.
even just in our country, there's segments of the country where it's more discussed than other places.
Yeah.
It's based on someone's culture, how much they're willing to talk about mental illness.
Exactly. And let's get into more of your story and then we'll lead it back to it. So you said, of course, that you are diagnosed with mental illness, and we won't necessarily get into I won't ask about the specifics, but what I will say about myself, um, in total transparency, this isn't something that I talk about a lot on my own personal platform, but several years ago, two things. ADHD, I was diagnosed with that, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but also something a bit more, and not making light of ADHD, but about 15, 16 years ago, I was diagnosed with a condition. No, actually, it's been longer now. Time flies. 17 years ago, diagnosed with a condition called generalized anxiety disorder.
Yes.
And you're right, anxiety is something we all get, but it becomes a mental illness when it begins to take over your life. And so I had to, it was a lot of pressure and stress from a job at the time I was on. It was a really toxic work environment and so much more. And it led me over the edge, and I just didn't know what was going on. And I was grateful I had a therapist who was sharp enough to say, let me send you to a psychiatrist I know who could really help. And that's when it was diagnosed. I had treatment, and now I'm able to manage it without prescriptions now. But it's okay if a person needs it. So I say that not to make this about me, but just to be open about, y'all, this happens to so many people, and even people in my family with mental illnesses, but who have sought treatment. Maddie, take us back to your upbringing, your childhood. Tell us about some of the culture in your home growing up in terms of, is this something, mental health and mental illness? Was this something that was regularly discussed in your household? And then just give us a bit about your journey as to what led you to this place and space you are in now that leads you to have so much passion about helping others.
Mental health was definitely discussed in my house. My mom was in healthcare, and my father was super progressive. He had his own mental health struggles. So I call it like the mock therapy sessions with my mom once a week. So we checked in and practiced that communication. And when I was about 14, I knew something, I didn't know it was different about me because when you're a
Hmm.
child, you think everyone's the same and you only know what you know.
Yeah.
But I read this magazine article at the time I was having a lot of hallucinations and depression and anxiety and compulsive thinking. And when I read this magazine article, I showed my mom, and the woman in the article had OCD. And I was like,
Oh,
maybe this is different about me. And I showed my mom, and I said, I think I need to go to the doctor. And my parents were all for it initially. They said, yes, they took me to a neuropsychiatrist. I was diagnosed with OCD. That was my first, but not last diagnosis.
wow.
And um, the topic of medication came up, and that was a hot topic in my house. My mother was
Yeah.
for it, my father was against it, but ultimately I chose to take medication. But that wasn't my only diagnosis, so I became psychotic or manic or depressed throughout high
Wow.
school and college, and I just simply went through the motions.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was 19, I was in college at the time, and I was hallucinating so profusely that I couldn't leave my home. And I was so manic, and I began having behaviors like self-harming, to try to numb the pain I was having. And my mother and father caught wind that something was going on and had me come home from school. And it was all just so much. And I had this consuming thought that I didn't belong on earth anymore. And I just
Mm-hmm.
wanted to go. And so my mother took me to the hospital, and my diagnosis it had changed to mood disorder not otherwise specified in high school and
Mm-hmm.
generalized anxiety. And at 19, they changed it to bipolar disorder 1.
Wow.
Um, it would change again. But at the time, they started these heavy duty medications, and I had all these side effects, and I
Mm.
was in and out of hospitals most of my 20s. Um, I had either mania with psychosis or depression with psychosis, and I really withdrew from society. I
Mm-hmm.
just did, because when you have psychosis, it's like living in two worlds. So there's everybody responding to you or talking to you, but
Mm.
then you hear it with your ears, but then it might trigger a delusion or a paranoid thought, or maybe you hear a voice. And it's like so all encompassing that it's hard to get that response back out. So,
Oh,
yeah, or by the time
yeah.
you gather a response, it's a little too late. So,
So,
I really,
Maddie, really quickly, just to help the listeners, I understand a lot of these terms, but could you briefly, in simplistic
yes,
terms, explain what manic is and psychosis exactly in
yes,
simpler
sorry.
terms? That's okay. No, no, no. Do not apologize. It's fine.
So my when you have bipolar disorder or schizoaffective bipolar type, which is what I have, you live with three things: mania, depression, and psychosis. Mania is the up level of the mood disorder. So people may enjoy it at first because they feel happy and excited, and they're sleeping less and eating less, and it's an enjoyable feeling. But then comes the reckless behaviors, because that part of your brain that tells you this is a really bad idea is not processing anymore. So people become impulsive. They may spend their life savings on a boat when they don't live near water. They may cheat on their
Oh,
spouse of 30 years. Behaviors that are atypical, not normal for them, they may participate in, and they may become more agitated or
hmm.
combative during mania. And it's actually a very dangerous state to be in and very hard to treat, because it can be
Oh,
enjoyable by the person and they may resist medication. But it is very important that we do medicate, because it can lead to very dangerous behaviors.
okay.
Depression is the low. A lot of
Hmm.
people associate depression with lack of motivation. Personal hygiene is difficult. Self-harming and suicidal ideations come along with depression. They may sleep more or eat more. And
Hmm.
it's that low, low. And then psychosis is typically heard of when you talk about schizophrenia.
Hmm.
It can be a part of bipolar disorder as well, but that's things like delusion. So thinking things are real when they're not and getting carried away with it,
Hmm.
paranoid thinking, visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, tactile hallucinations. It's a
Wow.
it's a break from reality. So what
I've
you're
never
seeing,
heard of tactile, meaning that
yes,
people actually think. they're touching something
Yes.
and it becomes something else. Is that
Yes.
what you mean by that?
Yes, I do. So, for example, the last time I had psychosis, I was visualizing and hearing birds in my house, but I could pick the feathers up and feel the feathers in my hands.
My goodness.
It was very real
Wow.
to me, but none
Of
of it was
course.
there.
Yeah.
The first time I encountered tactile hallucinations was with my grandmother. She had dementia and she was picking up items that weren't there, but she could feel them in her hands and
My
her
gosh.
movements looked so real, like she really had something in her hands because she felt it and saw it.
And Maddie, I know that you aren't a doctor, but you've worked in the field enough and also being a patient. What is it that causes the brain to think that? Is there a chemical imbalance? Because I say that is that people, one way that I put it, and that's why mental health is so important because I always compare it like this. If a person's having chest pains that are intensifying, getting worse by the minute, and then your arm starts to go numb in your hands, you're just not going to say, oh, it's okay. I'm just going to pray it away.
Right,
And I believe in faith, prayer, all of that. So I'm not saying not to pray, but then too, if you, God forbid, go out and you get hit by a car and your leg is crushed, you're just not going to say, oh, this like skin will grow back on my leg. No, skin is an organ. The heart is an organ. The liver is an organ. The brain is an organ. And sometimes our society forgets that the brain is an organ. So when it comes to these different things happening in the brain, is it that the brain is affected by certain chemicals or
yes.
what?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
it is a chemical imbalance in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Two chemicals you may hear spoken about a lot with mental illness are dopamine and serotonin. A
Yeah.
person may have too much dopamine or not enough dopamine. Same thing with serotonin. So depression is serotonin. The
Yep.
medications are called SSRIs. They affect serotonin. And when you get into things like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, that's when dopamine is discussed a lot. And medications like antipsychotics affect the dopamine and serotonin in the brain.
Mm,
They may add serotonin or block serotonin, and the same thing with dopamine, because the way our brains are functioning is there is a chemical imbalance. This is a medical condition,
that's
the
right.
same as you're saying as a heart condition. Like, if I had diabetes, I would go to the doctor and take insulin. So because I
Hmm.
have mental illness, I'm going to go to the doctor and take my medications because like you said, the brain is an organ and this definitely is a
Hmm.
medical diagnosis.
Yeah. And I think because of the behaviors that can be exhibited, it can scare people.
Yes.
And it can make people think that, oh no, that's not, especially if you come from a very religious background, and it's nothing wrong with that. But I believe personally God works through people as well. And that's why we have doctors and we have the treatments. And so it begs the question, since you were a girl, you were a teenager, but still you were a girl with all this, and thank goodness you had such supportive parents. How did it affect your day-to-day activities in school and even amongst friendships?
It was difficult, but I
Mm,
had learned really early on because my mental health symptoms started when I was 4 that
really?
I started wearing this mask in public. So I knew the appropriate way to act. And I did, it was like a full-time job, just it was like a role, like an actress role when I went to school or when I went to hang out with my friends. And
Hmm.
I had been doing it for so long, like today it's second nature because society doesn't look at you the same if you're acting a different way. So a
Hmm.
lot of people with mental illness learn to put that mask on in public. But when I went home, I was so drained mentally, physically, and emotionally from wearing that all day that I had nothing left to give. And my moods would fluctuate. I would spend time in my room hallucinating.
Mm,
And I isolated a lot because of this. Like I had friends growing up, but when I started having more profound symptoms in my late teens, I
mm,
stopped having a social life. And I literally just told my friends I can't be your friend anymore because it was too much for me.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, it's a regret I have to this day, but I was so unwell mentally
Hmm.
that I was so depressed that just getting out of bed was difficult. And going to school was difficult, going to work was difficult, and that's all I had left to give. And
Hmm.
that was really a pattern that followed me into my adult life. Like in my 20s, I wasn't social. I went to work, but that was about it. And when I came home, my job was so draining that I didn't function very well. I didn't have
Hmm.
much motivation. I was married, but a lot of that became almost caretaker for my husband with me from time to time because I just had nothing left in me.
Wow. Wow. I think it's very telling and honest of you in terms of with your friendships because I think that, you know, perhaps you were in such a state that you didn't realize the fact your friends liked you for you. I mean, they
Right.
liked you. And because they liked you, of course, they more than likely wanted to be there to support you. But when mentally you don't have that clarity, then it can be easy to just shut people out of your life. So let's talk about, because again, this show is all about how overcoming challenges, obstacles have really shaped you into who you are. So you start to get the treatment as a teenager from some pretty phenomenal parents who were openly talking about it. I came from that type of a household too, parents who talked about it, understood it, etc. And so when, Maddie, do you begin to sense a clearer focus, a more confident sense of yourself? It takes work and it's not overnight, and it's something that you'll constantly practice. But I'm talking about early on. How did you know that you were starting to reclaim pivotal aspects of your life?
Um, it took me so I went to the hospital the first time at 19, and it
Hmm.
took me until I was 35 years old to do that.
Wow.
Yeah, so my 20s were very difficult. I was over medicated. I was thinking that pills are the answer and relying solely on that instead of holistic care.
Hmm.
Um, and really just suffering immensely. Um, and I had no self-esteem and no self-confidence. And I mentioned earlier that I wasn't always a kind person. And in my 20s, I was so my delusions and my voices are very negative in my head, and
Oh.
it makes me believe that the world hates me. And so I kind of portrayed that hate back onto the world. So the few people I had in my life didn't always want to be around me. Um,
Mm.
it was a very lonely time, but after almost dying and at 35 years old, I had to re-examine my life. I was sick and
Mm.
tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
I I had a very traumatic near-death experience because of my mental illness. Um, and was forced to look myself in the mirror and say, you know what? You have cheated death. You are amazing. You
Mm.
can overcome anything. And I had to reframe those negative voices in my mind into positive self talk
Yes.
and look at the world in a positive light. And it took a ton of effort on my part. It wasn't an overnight situation.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it took me a really long time to get there.
Mhm. So I thank you for sharing that. And then something else that I appreciate is the fact that, you know, you have told me, and of course you shared it here, that you are married. And sometimes people can wonder, it could be someone right now listening to this podcast who are saying, wow, I would really love to have love in my life, but I don't know who's going to deal with somebody like me. And the reality, I like to say, there's a lid for every pot. As long as you want that lid to go in that pot, hey. But in a case like that, Maddie, how did you even get the strength or the courage to be open to a relationship, let alone marriage? I think that is commendable.
I had this thought in my mind in my 20s that I was just going to be alone.
Oh,
Um, yeah, but then I got on the dating apps. I'm like, let me just show that I'm not afraid of men. That was my
yeah.
my thought. And I met
I'm not
him.
afraid of you guys. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I remember my husband now messaging me, and for some reason this idea popped in my head. He could be the one. And I
Oh,
wasn't very nice to him at first.
wow.
Yeah, he ditched me on our first date.
No, he.
Yeah, because I wasn't being very nice. But we actually did, it was love at first sight.
Uh-huh.
And I went from thinking I'm going to be alone to never wanting to separate again. And
Wow. That's
yeah, and
incredible.
I always thought, because I have mental illness, nobody can really love me or nobody will quote
Yeah.
want to put up with me. Um,
Wow.
but just to give a little perspective, when I was dying in 2023, so I had extreme lithium toxicity, serotonin syndrome, and AME, which is acute metabolic something or another. I had a brain
Mhm.
injury. Um, and he had to be my caretaker for 4 months. I couldn't do
Wow.
anything. He changed my diapers.
Mm.
He did the food, the groceries, paid my bills, did my meds. I mean, you name it. I couldn't drive. He did everything for
Wow.
me. And he did it out of love. He did it
Mhm.
because we're partners. And when you find someone who loves you in that capacity, he went from being a 33-year-old doing 33-year-old things to working full time and caring for his wife full time. That's not an
Wow.
easy transition, especially at that age, but he loved me enough to make that sacrifice for me. And if you're listening and you think nobody can love you because you have mental illness, I challenge that idea. There's
Mhm.
somebody for everybody. It's just a
Yup.
matter of finding the right person.
That is. Wow. What a story. Oh my gosh. We'll have to talk offline as to what in the world happened because for that first date to not have even happened or go well and now you are married, that is incredible. Something worked out. Something
Yes,
worked
yes.
out. And so as you continue to get the treatment and you said it wasn't until really at 35 where things kind of come full circle. And let me make it clear, y'all, this is not something that's ever quote unquote cured. Okay.
No,
No matter how much people try to sell you stuff nowadays or to say, oh, if you just eat this food, it'll clear out that. Yes, your diet, exercise can help you have a better quality of life, but it's not the end all be all to it because sometimes people think that, oh, if you just change this, then this will happen. And that's not always true. And
no.
so, with you having this deep awareness of self, but also having this insight, what caused you to say, okay, this is what I want to do professionally in terms of serving in these spaces of people who could really use my support? How did all that happen, Maddie?
So after my brain injury and poisoning, I had to have intense therapeutic services.
Okay.
And I found that there really wasn't any. And
Ooh.
I live in a rural area and I did find a therapeutic farm, but that was like an hour from my home and
Hmm.
like the only resource I had. And so I really wondered why there weren't more resources for people like
Hmm.
me, especially people with serious mental illness. I had never even met anybody else with schizoaffective, so that
Hmm.
was a lonely path in itself. So I just had this idea. I was like, what if I can bring people together like they do in
Hmm.
NA and AA for mental health and create our own community of like-minded people who can grow together? And that's how got started. That's how I formed the nonprofit, and that's what we do with the nonprofit. And I loved it so much that I was like, why can't I go further with this? So
Yeah.
I wanted to do therapy on a grant level, like using grant funding, because I believe mental health care is far too expensive. Um, and so I got into graduate school. And so for social work, I don't want to do therapy anymore because I fell in love with what's called macro social work, things
Hmm.
like advocacy and policy and fighting for the rights of others is really
Yes.
community engagement. That's where my heart lies. But it all started from my own healing journey, finding out there's not enough resources out there. turned into a job of how can I create those resources?
That's right. A problem that had to be solved.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's brilliant. That's really, really brilliant. And so once you saw that problem that had to be solved, then you just hit the ground running
Yes.
with what you had to do. So let us know what exactly your nonprofit supports with. Take us in a day in the life of some of the
Yeah.
functions of it.
So we do have 100% free support groups. I believe mental health care should be equitable, affordable, and accessible.
And
And
it's
that's what I'm
called
striving.
what? Your
J&E Support Group is our
okay.
nonprofit.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we have a one group that's virtual for people living with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and bipolar disorder. That was our first group. It
Oh.
runs one night a week. It's virtual, so anybody across the country can join. And then we did really well with that. So now we have two in-person mental wellness groups. They meet once a week, and it's just about building communities, sharing skills, letting people know they're not alone. We advertise that it's not therapy, we're not therapists, we're peer
Hmm.
support, but you can find people like you and you can find people who can share ideas and similarities. It's in the name, it's support. And then
Hmm.
outside of the support groups, we plan community engagement activities. So
Wow.
I'm trying to combat stigma, which I've learned is a really like big job. And one idea I had with that was to develop a mental health simulation. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
ever heard of a reentry or poverty simulation,
I
but
haven't. No. What
so it's
exactly is
really
that?
cool. It's cool. They have them for the criminal justice system and poverty, but I want to do one for mental illness. And what that looks like is community members will come to a big room with tables set up, and they'll
Hmm.
be given a portfolio. The portfolio is going to have what's your diagnosis? Do you have insurance? If so, what kind? Do you have a job, children? Are you in school? The whole portfolio. And the tables set up around the room are agencies from the community. Maybe it's social
Oh.
services, maybe it's the pharmacy, maybe it's your job. And when you visit each table, you're going to be given a scenario. Maybe you get fired, lose your insurance, need your meds, you need to go to social services and apply for Medicaid. Like,
Wow.
how do you navigate going to work and asking for accommodations?
That's
What do you do
brilliant.
if you're what if you do and you're in crisis and you get stopped by the police and you end up incarcerated? Like day-to-day activities that someone with mental illness may face. And once the simulation is done, we're going to follow up with a provider and lived experience panel to provide some education. And everyone will be given the opportunity to sign up for 100% free mental health first aid classes to further
Oh,
educate the community about what they can do if they meet someone living with mental illness and crisis.
that's wonderful. And wow, that is so amazing. I never heard of that. And I like how that goes. But since you are a nonprofit, how are you getting funding?
That is a great question. Um, Currently, we are very much underfunded. Most
Mhm.
of the work I do with the nonprofit and my employees is for free, because we believe in the mission.
Yeah.
I am in the process of writing grants. I do believe in grant funding because I
Hmm.
don't want to ask my group members or my community members for money to pay for these services. That's not what I'm about. We do accept donations and do fundraisers. That is primarily how we're funded at this point. Um, but, our physical space for groups is all donated. The community, when they hear it, love the idea and get behind it. And I couldn't ask for anything more. I couldn't do anything I do if it wasn't for my community.
And where exactly are you located again? We forgot to tell the audience. You've
Yes,
told
I'm in
me,
North
but you forgot to tell.
Carolina. I'm in North Carolina. My nonprofit is based in Randolph County, North Carolina, which is a very rural area with a lack of mental health providers and a high
Hmm.
level of stigma. Traditionally, research shows that rural areas lack mental health providers and have a high level of stigma. Um, so that's why I chose Randolph County because I feel like I can make the biggest impact. Um, yeah. So shout
Yeah.
out to Randolph County.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing that. And I think too, Maddie, along this journey and you just seeing your own growth, thinking about when you were younger and you were just trying to navigate all of this because it was new, based on to where you are now, what makes you most proud of yourself with when it comes to all of this work?
And I never gave up. Because, like,
Yeah.
when I heard the word bipolar and then when I heard the word schizoaffective bipolar type, I thought my life was over. I thought,
Hmm.
because everything I knew before changed in that moment. And I thought, well, what is life going to be like? And I was very afraid. And after each episode of crisis, I lived with a lot of guilt and shame and thought I couldn't go on. And my 20s were riddled with a lot of suicidal actions. And it was very blue, I guess is the
Mm-hmm.
word to say it. But today I went from surviving to thriving, and I
Hmm.
love life, and I live in gratitude is the best way to say it. So I'm just proud that during those hard moments, I never gave up.
Yeah, you certainly haven't. And so many people could have easily done that. And so when it comes to even your own journey of resiliency, never giving up, what are ways that you, in a sense, with the people that come in through the nonprofit and things of that nature, have you experienced it where you've had to give somebody that extra nudge that maybe they were just on the verge of giving up on everything, but then you had to step in, intervene, and just give somebody that extra nudge? How did you do that?
I think remaining positive
Mm,
and in the moment helps a lot of people because when we're in crisis, a lot of times we're going backwards, right? Like, this happened, this happened, this happened. I'm very overwhelmed, but we need to be mindful and live in the present. Every second in life is a new opportunity to change your life for the better. And I
mhm.
try to express that to people. And what skill can I teach you in this moment so that you can
Yeah.
get through to the next? And the most important thing that I tell everybody is celebrate. You took a breath,
Mhm.
celebrate. Every small step is worthy of
Mhm.
celebration.
Yeah. And that's a good reminder, Maddie, because sometimes people won't think that they're worthy or that their efforts aren't as big as someone else's. And I think it's so important to not get into the comparison trap, but meeting
Yes.
yourself exactly where you are. I still have a couple of more questions to ask you, but I wanted to just take a pause here. If someone would like to donate to or learn more about your nonprofit, how can they reach out to you?
The best way is our website, which is jesupport.org. My email is on there, and I always say that my inbox is open to anyone. Maybe you don't know resources, maybe you need a listening ear. I do my
Mm-hmm.
best to check it frequently, so don't hesitate to reach out if you need support.
Mm. Now, going back to when you were sharing how supportive that your parents were when you were growing up, tell us about the person who might not have the support. They know that they need the help, they desire it, they might not be able to put their finger on what's exactly going awry in their minds. I don't like to say wrong because it's not necessarily a wrong thing happening. It's just that something's happening in the brain. What do you say to them to convince them to say, hey, get some help? It's okay. We will help you through this. What do you say to that person who knows that they need help, but just like, I don't know.
I always express the importance that there's no shame in asking for help. You
Mm-hmm.
know, everybody needs help in some aspect from time to time, and dealing with something that is new and unknown is scary. And dealing with mental illness can be extremely overwhelming and all
Mm,
consuming. And so reach out to a professional. And if you don't have a professional yet or don't know where to get one, Psychology Today has a list of providers with their insurance they accept, but free resources. NAMI has a phone number you can call, a helpline, which is a national hotline.
mhm,
That number, I have it written down, is 800-950-6264. And they can
okay.
also link you with resources. If you're in crisis, call or text 988.
Mhm.
And in North Carolina, you can always call the Warm Line.
Oh, and I will definitely put those links in the show notes as well. What's next for you, Maddie, moving forward? It doesn't have to be all of your plans or goals, but your conditions are well managed. You have a very good head on your shoulders. You have reclaimed certain aspects of your life where you can now serve and help others. But what's next out there for you in terms of doing this work?
Well, first, I have to take care of myself on a daily basis.
Yeah,
I have to do therapy, I have to exercise, eat healthy, take my medicine. I
yeah.
have to use sunlight therapy, all the skills I've learned along the way. If I don't get enough sleep and take care of myself, I can't do anything because,
Hmm.
like you said, I'm never going to be cured. I
Hmm.
have symptoms from time to time, so I have to manage those first. But I think with my degree, when I graduate, I'm so excited to be an advocate,
Yes.
a voice of change, maybe for policy, maybe for people's rights. I'm not entirely sure where it's going to lead me,
Yeah.
but that's my passion. I have so much passion, especially for behavioral health. So
Mm.
anything I can do to help anybody else keeps me healthy too.
Wow. And Maddie, you certainly are a story of true power and the ability to be able to transform your life and beat odds when so many people think that if you're in these situations that there's no hope for you, but you keep creating hope day by day by day. And so as we come to a close here, what is your hope for the world of mental health?
I dream of a day where mental health is not stigmatized
Hmm.
and people can express their mental health concerns the same way people express their physical health concerns and don't have to
Yeah.
hide who they are. I hid who I was for 35 years and it was debilitating. It really made my symptoms worse. Today I'm pretty vocal, but not everybody's as safe as me to do so. So I
Yeah.
dream of a day where people can express what they need, want, and desire in a safe environment and be met with kindness about it because kindness is free.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Power Transformation Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review. It helps us inspire even more listeners. And don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who could use a little power in their transformation. Until next time, keep bouncing back, keep rising, and be good to yourself and to others.